Welcome back to another episode of The Sweet Spot. This is John Sherman from the Four Foundations of Golf. And as always, I'm joined by
Adam from Adam Young Golf.
So today we're going to, last episode, we talked about anger, how angry I got on the golf course and some ideas on how to deal with anger. And hopefully that helped some of you. I sent it out in a newsletter this morning. I got some nice responses because, as I expected, a lot of other people get angry on the golf course sometimes. So hopefully you enjoyed that episode. This one we're gonna ping pong back and forth between Adam and myself on some quicker ideas. I I met Sir Nick Faldo the other night at a Ryder Cup event, so I had a nice conversation with him. I pulled him aside. I'm going to recap some of the takeaways, and Adam's got some topics. So let's start with we'll go back and forth, and we'll see where we end up with how many topics. It's probably only going to be one, knowing us. But what do you want to start with, Adam?
Tack angle versus depth.
What did you say before? Steep is not deep.
Yeah, or I suppose the main confusion is when you say shallow, because shallow does have both those meanings, right? You have shallow attack angle, but
Yes.
you also have shallow depth. Shallow depth would be you're not going too low through or through too much dirt. But we have to separate them out. You have to see them as separate entities, because when instructors especially talk about shallow, we are talking about attack angle. Usually, most instructors. I mean, maybe that's not the case. Maybe in
Almost no one talks about arc depth. I think you're one of the people who has popularized it and people are talking about it more often. But yeah, it's always in relation to attack angle when someone says you're steep or shallow. That's my understanding of it too.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I first thought about arc depth years and years ago, but I first put it into a product in the strike plan in 2015. But it's becoming much more of a popular topic at the moment. Joe Mayo is doing a great job of bringing people's awareness to it in chipping, but it's obviously very relevant in every part of your game, even putting, I suppose. But hopefully you don't have arc depth issues, not topping putts or fatting putts. But
Yeah, that would be painful.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about shallow or steep, I mean, there are different areas we could look at. So the attack angle part, that's the most relevant to the ball, because that's whether the club is working down into the ball, working level, or working up into the ball. The only times you'd be hitting up is maybe on a putt slightly or on a drive when the ball is teed up. So that is most relevant to the ball. That's the thing that the ball experiences. That has an effect on things like launch angles, spin rates, things like that. So when I talk about steep or shallow, I'm 90% of cases, 99% of cases, I should say, I'm talking about that, the attack angle. So you could think of it, imagine an aeroplane, or Americans say airplane, don't they? Coming into a golf ball, whether it's landing, kind of crash landing into the golf ball, into the base of the golf ball, or whether it's landing very softly. So the crash landing is going to be a steep attack angle, steep descent, and the touching down gently is going to be a shallow descent. Now, which part of the golf ball that plane hits, if you imagine it, just a little plane that's the size of a golf ball, if it hits the base of the golf ball or the middle of the golf ball or the top of the golf ball or even behind the golf ball, that's more an arc depth thing.
Yes. So technically you could hit the top of the golf ball with a steep or level angle of attack.
Yeah, you could hit up on, it'd be hard to hit up on the top of the ball, but yeah, you could hit it with a steep or shallow attack angle. And likewise, you could land that plane. You could get that club to land on the spot where the ball is resting, the base of the ball. You could get that to happen with a steep or a shallow attack angle as well. So that's two ways. That's one way of thinking of it, the airplane analogy. The other is hula hoop. So thinking of the swing as a circle, imagining the bottom of that circle, and where the ball is on the bottom of that circle is going to be relevant for attack angle. If the ball is right at the bottom, the lowest part of that circle, then you're going to have a neutral attack angle. The club is neither going to be working up nor down. As you move the ball back in that circle, or as you move the circle forwards, you're going to get a steeper attack angle, a steeper descent into the ball. And then the arc depth component is whether that circle is deeper, whether you drop that hula hoop deeper into the ground or raise it up so it's not touching the ground. So that's arc depth. Now, with the circle as well, or the hula hoop, you can think of steep and shallow. Lots of people use those terms in terms of the tilt of the hula hoop. So people talk about that in terms of plane. So club plane. And again, these are all different things. You can have a steep plane. So imagine if you make that hula hoop upright like a Ferris wheel, that would be a steep plane. And you can still have any attack angle along that plane. If the ball is at the lowest point of that circle, then it's a neutral attack angle, whether that plane is steep or shallow. Steep like a Ferris wheel, shallow like a baseball swing. The attack angle is 0 as long as it's on the bottom of that hula hoop. Whereas as you move the ball back in that hula hoop, whether the plane is steeper or shallower, you're going to get a steeper attack angle as well. So we have to think of these terms differently. You have to think of steep plane and steep attack angle are different things, as are shallow attack angle, shallow plane, and shallow depth. They're all different concepts. Make sense? Any questions? So think of this then. You could have a shallow attack
I know what you're saying. I'm trying to think of, I'll admit to being I'm a little confused, and I'm thinking about, well, maybe someone will be a lot confused. So I guess the question is what's the most important one to this or noticing it on the course?
Attack angle and arc depth.
Yeah.
Would be the main things that you would look at. Arc depth is usually, I would say, the most important thing for people because it's the thing that changes the most from swing to swing. And it has a great effect on ground contact as well. So it has about an 8-to-1 effect on ground contact, meaning if you drop 1 inch deeper, you will hit about 8 inches farther back, which is crazy to think of that.
Yeah, it's the like north-south of the golf club, like how high or low it is as it's approaching the ball.
Yeah, the altitude.
The altitude. Now, my question would be do you see a lot of correlation with a steep attack angle and a deep arc depth, or are they separate?
Yes, there are combinations there, so they're not completely untied together. A shallower attack angle tends to go better with a shallower arc depth as well, especially in the full swing.
Because you're picking the ball more. Yeah.
Yeah, in the short game, we can manipulate things. The arc is much more circular, tighter, so we can change things there. Even then, all else being the same, you would want the lowest point. Well, here's where it gets even more interesting is you could talk about the arc depth at the ball. So think of where you hit on the face vertically, if you hit high on the face or low on the face. So that would be arc depth at the ball versus arc depth at the lowest point of the swing. So think of the hula hoop again. Imagine there's a little dent in the hula hoop, right? Or you draw a little black line on the hula hoop right at the bottom, the lowest part of that hula hoop. So you could have different low points for different arc depth for the low point of the hula hoop and at the ball as well. So, I mean, if you've got a dinner plate in front of you, tilt it up like a Ferris wheel. So it's on the table and just look at it. Look at the part of the plate that's touching the surface of the table. That would be the low point. Now, as you go back in that on the rim of the plate, you'll see the arc depth raises. The farther back you go, the more the rim is higher from the table. So depending on where the ball is in that arc, you're going to get different arc depths there. So generally, if we have a steeper attack angle, we will also need that low point to be deeper into the ground, generally. And that's on an all else being equal scale, everything, the size of the plate being the same, things like that. So yeah, they are tied in. Another example of this that's really relevant is I get a lot of people who will hit their driver and they top it or sky it. Say you take a skied shot. What do most people, what do lots of people say when they skied it?
Ouch. I don't know. That
Well,
sucked.
what I hear a lot is, I got steep on that one.
Yeah, maybe. I've heard a million different reasons for Aaron shots at this
Or I
point.
got under it.
Yeah.
I got under it. And it depends how people are interpreting that phrase as well. But I've
Yeah.
asked
Yeah.
people when they say I got under it, I ask them, what do you mean by that? And I'll often get the club up at eye height and the ball, and I'll say, show me what you think the club and the ball did at impact. And sometimes when people say I got under it, they imagine the club working up into the ball more. And that's why they sky it. So that's what they're thinking. So they're thinking an attack angle change. They're thinking they
Yeah.
hit up on it
But
more.
you would say the arc depth dropped too much, therefore they
Yeah,
struck
well,
it
I
very
know
high on
the
the
arc
face.
depth
Yeah.
drop more
Yes.
because I've seen so many shots hit on launch monitors, and to see the attack angle change by that much, it really doesn't. For
So you're
most
saying
players.
that attack, I'm thinking about my swing. So when I struggle with my irons, I tend to hit it thin. And I know my attack angle with most of my irons is 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees deep at this point. That's probably not changing that much swing to swing. But when I miss, I'm not behind the ball chunking it. It's low on the face and lightly brushing the grass in front of the ball. So my arc depth, my hands raised up. Whereas when I'm really hitting it well, good contact on the face and then taking that divot in front of the ball, meaning to me, my arc depth dropped to the proper height. So attack angle didn't change, just the altitude, as you said, of the golf club was better.
Exactly, yeah, and it could be as much as just 1 or 2 grooves, because a
Yes.
great feeling strike on the face is like the 4th groove, and then it
Yeah, it's the
starts to feel
difference.
pretty poor on the 2nd groove. So
Yeah, it's
2
the
grooves is about 3, that is about 6, 7 millimeters.
Yeah, I had a shot the other day exactly like a 9 iron, hit it probably on the second groove, shoots out low, doesn't get in the air, kind of just tumbles on the just a not a well struck shot. And as you're saying this, like 100% arc depth issue, because my hands, that seems to be my error the last few years, is my hands pull up.
Yeah.
That
I mean,
that's
it can be an attack angle issue or a low point shift. So those are kind of the same things, right? If you shift that dinner plate or the hula hoop forwards, if you shift the lowest point of your swing forwards, the arc depth at the ball is going to be higher. So you could, in theory, thin it. And this is actually reverse to what most people think. You could thin it more when that low point shifts more forwards. And why it's different to what most people think is because you actually hit it when the low point moves forwards, you are steeper on the ball. And most people assume steep with fat. Well, actually, steep is more likely to hit it thin. If you shift everything forwards, ground contact shift forwards, arc depth at the ball is higher, you will hit it lower on the face. I've done the geometry on it. For every inch that you shift forwards, you'll hit around about 1 groove lower on the face. It does depend on multiple factors, but that's a nice rule of thumb there. So every inch you shift forwards. Now, the interesting thing, having watched thousands, tens of thousands of shots on launch monitor, is you don't actually see that much shift from players. They don't change their attack angle that much. In fact, really good players may only change their low point by about 1/4 of an inch. So one time they might be 1/4 of an inch farther forwards, one time they might be 1/4 of an inch farther back. So that's a really good player who's never really fatting it or thinning it. Even bad players are only about 1/2 an inch either side. So there's not that much shift from people. People are very consistent in terms of the shift. But the problem is they're also as consistent in terms of the depth. So they might have, say they got 1/2 an inch shift either side, the low point shifting forwards or back 1/2 an inch. That's not going to cause an issue with strike. But 1/2 an inch of depth, raising or drop, that will cause an issue. And that's why we need to really be good at arc depth control. That's why we really need to build in protections in our motion for it as well. But yeah, it's just, it's an interesting one to think about. Like I said, a attack angle is not the same as plane, is not the same as depth that you go in. You could have a shallow attack angle and go through the ground very deep. That would be a chunk shot. And lots
yes.
of people say, oh, I got steep on that. And you look at their attack angle and you say, actually, no, you're still shallow. And you could be very steep on it with an attack angle and hit it thin. Or you could hit it fat as well. You can hit thins and fats with steep attack angles. You could have a shallow plane. So Garcia would be a good example of this. A very shallow plane, downswing plane, yet his attack angle would be very steep at impact. So all these things are very different. The last one I'd say with that, with the driver, because the other end of the scale, I've talked about people saying, "Oh, I got under that one." Now, if you think when you say I got under that one, if you mean I hit the crown, then that's thumbs up. You've got the right interpretation there. But if you think that you started to hit up on it a lot more, that's not the case. Other people say I got steep on that one. They'll sky one and say, "Oh, I got too steep on that." You didn't. It's very unlikely that your attack angle changed that much. It's very unlikely for it to be meaningful to hit high on the face. What's more likely, club altitude was just lower.
Yeah.
So think about what part of the tee you hit. If you clip the top of the tee, the very top of the tee, you won't sky it. If you go too low to the base of the tee, then you may sky it, depending on tee height.
So would you say this is similar to the relationship between club path and face angle, where most golfers have a more consistent club path, but from swing to swing, the variability in the open or closedness of the face is, obviously we talk about this a lot on the show, like that is the kind of the glue that presents functional ball flight. And in this example, it's attack angle would be club path. That's the more consistent number. And arc depth would be more like face angle. That is changing from shot to shot, where you're getting chunks, skulls, which would be very high on the face or low on the face as well. I know that correlates with strike pattern. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's a good analogy because attack angle doesn't change as much as arc depth, and attack angle doesn't have as much of an effect on strike as arc depth.
No, I can
yeah.
tell you, I think one of my main struggles the last year or two with wedges and irons has absolutely been arc depth. Like when it's good, hitting great shots. And when it's not, I see that thin hands pull up too high of an altitude. That's my interpretation of it, at least what I'm feeling. I don't really measure these things, obviously, but it makes sense to me as I see like what's a well struck shot versus what's the thinner contact. Why is the contact thin? And I believe if I had to bet on it, it's an arc depth issue.
Yep. I mean, I've run the math on it with thousands of golf shots, plugged it into ChatGPT, and used the geometry modeling I have to say what causes a fat or thin shot for these players, or what's the highest correlation. I can't remember the exact numbers. Like 90% of it was arc depth related. When someone thins it, it's an arc depth. The altitude of the club has been too high, pretty much.
Yeah. So some way to train for that, try and intentionally hit like, different heights.
Yeah.
Especially with driver, like, you get different tee heights and stuff like that. You're challenging yourself to move the orientation of the club in kind of that space of impact, higher
Yeah,
or
that'd be a
lower.
good differential practice drill, different tee heights. Or you can another differential practice drill would be just trying to hit different grooves. I did a test the other day where I hit maybe 200 golf balls trying to hit different grooves.
Yeah, so higher or
So I'd
lower.
spray the face, and then I'd look at the middle of the mark, and I'd see which groove it hit. So then I would look at that and I would write it down and correlate it to the distance. So I'd hit a shot and I'd say, okay, that went 154 and it was on the second groove. That one went 170, it was on the fourth groove. And then I plugged it into ChatGPT, and I looked at the distance to groove ratio. And that exercise in itself was very, very highlighting, even to me, that it's amazing that we can almost pick which groove we want to hit with relative accuracy. I was able to say, I want to hit this on the second groove and get it one groove either side of it. So even surprised me how accurate we are, or we can be with that. And also when I trained it the next day, I was even better at that. So again, it shows these things. If you practice these things with good feedback, differential practice drills, actively exploring the scale, you get better quicker.
So long story short, arc depth is something that people don't hear about, think about, even measure on launch monitors, but it's kind of this invisible force that is very important, like face angle in terms of your interaction with the turf and strike location on the club face.
Yeah. It's actually
Fair.
very difficult. Even with launch monitors, we don't have
Yeah, how would you
real
measure?
ways.
Yeah.
I think TrackMan added a parameter that measures arc depth, but I looked at the numbers. It didn't. I think they were looking at the sweet spot arc depth, so the number didn't really. It didn't look functional. But that's just me not digging into the numbers. I'm going to have to go into that. But either way, I use vertical strike on the face. So a
Yeah,
simple thing
that's the
people
best
can use at
proxy.
home is just spray the face and look at which groove you hit. That's a great proxy for.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, if you're practicing on a grass range and you're hitting the ball in the right groove on the face and you're not chunking it, things are good. Nicely done. Like you can tell that. But
It's
yeah,
very,
it's
very difficult to hit the correct groove on the face and chunk it. If you hit the third
yeah,
groove,
yeah,
it's almost impossible to hit behind the ball. The only caveat to that it would be if your
on a
low
range
point
mat.
is behind the ball.
Yeah.
But for
Well, on
most
the range
people,
mat if it bounced up. Yeah, when you
yeah.
hit behind it. Okay, cool.
All right, your Tim.
All right, ping pong back to me. Okay, so we are recording this the week of the Ryder Cup. So you're listening to this after the Ryder Cup. But I went to an event Monday night where Sir Nick Faldo, excuse me, he's knighted, gave a little like roundtable discussion on his Ryder Cup experiences, which was very fun and interesting to listen to. And there was like a little time afterwards where people were just kind of chatting. So I yanked him aside and I just started talking with him. And I was just asking him about how he dealt with pressure, his swing, all these. We only talked for 15 minutes, but I thought I could give a little quick recap of what he said to me. I mean, I'm assuming Nick Faldo is one of your heroes growing up, right?
Yeah, he was one of my first books that I pulled out of the library. His swing mechanics book, which then led me to Ledbetter's stuff. Yeah, I loved the model of the swing. I had all his pictures and I was practicing the positions in the mirror. So yeah, I loved that book.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously we'd have too much time to talk, but even in his discussion on the Ryder Cup, he was talking about modern technology and what they had to work with in his day. And essentially, he talked about the feedback loop that we always talk about is that he's like, I would look at my ball flight and work backwards when I was practicing and making all these adjustments and paying attention on the course. So it was just nice to hear, like, one of the greatest to ever do it, talk about that. And the question I asked him on my own was, I'm always interested to someone who's won 6 major championships, tons of other tournaments, Ryder Cups. He's been in a crazy amount of pressure situations. And I said, well, were you nervous? How did you deal with it? And his response to me was interesting because he's like, to be honest, I didn't feel all that nervous. He's like, the only time I ever felt nerves overcome me was actually in the Ryder Cup. I think it was the 95 Ryder Cup at Oak Hill. And he was on the final hole against Curtis Strange. He had a very difficult, like 90-yard shot. And he's like, my knees literally started wobbling. I couldn't feel them. And I had to back off the shot and kind of go back in. He's like, that's the only time he ever felt truly overwhelmed on the golf course. But what I thought was interesting that he said the reason he never got nervous, he's like, I was prepared physically. He's like, I knew what I was doing. And he's like, I had a shot and these feels that he could rely on. And I asked him, was it that work with Ledbetter? Because obviously that was like a transformational time in his career, is that he spent a very long time. You know the details better than me of what he did with Ledbetter, but when he went through that process and worked on his ball striking skills and his technique and all of that stuff, he told me, he's like, there was a shot I hit earlier in my career under pressure where I just launched the ball way right. And he's like, I had to figure out a way in my hands to make sure I was hitting that cut. And he's like, once I found that thing, he's like, the pressure didn't feel insurmountable anymore. So it was interesting that like the physical kind of made him more comfortable. And he talked about, he's like, listen, I did all the breathing. He's like, I would pay attention to my body if I was tense. All of the right mental things that top performers do. He's like, of course I did all of that and I controlled it the best I could. But when he felt more comfortable and in control and prepared of his body and his swing, that made dealing with the pressure that much more, easier.
I wonder what that feeling was. So you said I don't know this story. So he was blocking it right, and he
He
didn't like
just
that, or
he hit a shot under pressure that he just is like, I can't hit that shot again.
okay, so a
And
shot he
I don't,
didn't like.
yeah, he didn't like. And he's like, once I found the solution to that feel, that go-to move under pressure, he's like, that's kind of when it all changed for me. And this is, the other side of this is when you talk to someone like him, his true greatness in him. I always wonder, I've said this before on the podcast, like, what is in Nick Faldo or any of the other players that reached the top of the game that no one else has? He worked his butt off, did all the right things, but a ton of other golfers have too. And they weren't able to do what he did. So I always wonder, like, what's inside of him that, enabled him to deal with the pressure outside of just conquering his golf swing. But that he felt the key for him, and I kind of reflected upon it, and I actually, there's a ton of truth to this. Thinking about it in my own game, like when my ball striking skills got better, it alleviated a ton of nerves and indecision on the golf course because I knew I could hit the shots. Right, you were better, and that makes this game easier. We talk about physical ball striking skills all the time. Like that solves a lot of problems in golf, mental included. But he felt like that was his main driving force. He was like, when I took control of my body and my swing, like everything else fell into place.
Yeah, they definitely feed into each other. I mean, it's hard to, you can tell yourself, be confident, be confident, be confident. But if the ball's
Yeah.
gone everywhere, it's hard
Yeah.
to be confident.
And I, a lot of this, I think about, my work with Mackenzie, and I'm hopefully going to get him on the podcast soon because he is working on his golf swing again with someone who he really likes where it's headed. And there's been some moments this season where, he had a chance to win, but he was a little uncertain of his golf swing coming down the stretch. And we've talked about like, well, where does one start and the other end? And it's like, the exact line is impossible to draw, but we're both in agreement that if he felt more comfortable in his golf swing, then that question wouldn't be on the 18th tee. Like, I need to hit this drive straight. And that was what Sir Nick said. He's like, that go-to feel, that go-to shot. He's like, that is your, the calm in the storm. And this applies to so many different, this isn't just about pro golf. This applies to everyone listening to this show, is that when you find that something, that intention, that feel, whatever it is, that's how you break 100. That's how you break 90. It's all relative to each level. And I'm a proponent of doing all of the right processes on the golf course and being in the right mindset. But yes, you can be as confident and zen as you want. If you don't have the right ball striking skills and you haven't worked on them enough, then yeah, that the game will be much harder and you will feel more pressure and indecision.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was interesting. And another way, he kind of was talking about the golf swing for a bit. And it was now he might have been technical at some point, but the stuff he was talking to me about was like skipping stones and feeling like sequencing, and reacting to targets and being an athlete. So he was very critical of being overly technical and felt more, being more intuitive was the way to be in the moment under pressure versus being overburdened by these swing thoughts. And man, he must have beat a lot of golf balls in practice to get to that point. So I also think that's the other side of it, is like we talk about how hard do you have to work on these things in practice to make them intuitive and reactionary and athletic on the golf course. Like that's a hard bridge to gap, but that's something he was kind of telling me, like that process between absorbing feedback and working out on the range so that when he gets out on the course, he can just kind of let it happen.
I'd be really interested to ask how you would have done things differently now with what we know, because I thought Faldo was super technical. I could be wrong with that, but obviously his book was very technical. Ledbetter was very technical. It's all position oriented. There are sprinkles of the whole skipping stones and things like that in there, but it's not really pushed as strongly as the positional parts. And I think Faldo was known for being very technical and had a beautiful looking swing. So you have to work on your positions to achieve that. I know Faldo was quite a short hitter, especially for his size. He's a giant, isn't he? He doesn't really
He's a large man. He's 6'3" or 6'4". Yeah, he's huge.
Yeah.
I felt like a nothing next to him. Like he's a
Yeah.
physical presence.
And apparently he didn't hit it as far as a lot of people imagined he should have. So with what we know about distance right now, I wonder if he would have gone back and tried to blast it a little bit farther,
I think
or what he
so
would have.
someone in the Q&A, someone did ask him about like modern technology, and he's like, I love it. He's like, I would have been all over it. I would have,
Yeah.
he was there when he actually was talking about how he had conversations with the TrackMan inventor when it first started. And he was kind of joking, like, oh man, I wish I'd given him the couple $1,000s he needed to build the first part of it. But he was, his impression of the game now was that because of TrackMan and all of the knowledge and the data, like people are getting there much faster. And he was like, when I was a kid, when I was 14 or 15, and when I decided to quit school and try and become a pro, he's like, I had two crappy golf clubs that I was trying to like figure out how to hit straight. And he's like, now it would have been so much more efficient and faster because the access to the information and the technology. And he said, I would have been all over it. He's like, I would have been using it. I would have embraced it. So I'm 100% certain that means he would have embraced the distance side of things as well.
It'd be super interesting to see if, obviously we can't do this experiment, but clone him and have him with the old knowledge and now the new stuff. Because obviously, a big thing that people talk about with Faldo is getting the ball flight laws wrong. Saying that the ball started on the face or ended up where the face was
Ended up, yeah.
pointing, and
Yeah.
where you point your feet is where the ball starts. So we know that to be not true, but
He
obviously
played
we
great
also
golf
know.
thinking that.
Yeah, well, we also know from motor learning science that your correct understanding of something doesn't always translate to the actual performance of it. We call it the difference between procedural and declarative knowledge. Declarative is what you would say you're doing, and procedural is your ability to actually do it. An example of that is we all are very good walkers. We can walk with great mechanics. But if you were to try and explain the mechanics of walking, do you land on your heel? Do you land on your toe? Do you roll? You have to think about it. You probably have to walk for a while and be like, oh, I don't know what I do actually. Which arm do I swing when I put this foot forwards? Our ability to do something is not always tied into our ability to explain it. And yeah, logic would say, oh, well, if he had better information, if he knew the ball flight laws, he'd be able to get to the right answers quicker. But it might not
Maybe,
be
yeah.
true. There may even
Well,
be a
listen,
detriment to it. You
they were
wire
still,
your brain differently if you're looking at a launch monitor all the time versus looking at ball flight.
yeah, I mean, in his era, all they had to look at was ball flight, right? And ball don't lie, right? Like, there, if he's on the range with Ledbetter and he's telling him something and the ball's going way to the right, and he's like, this isn't working. Like, it's
Yeah.
clear it's not working. Like, we're gonna, whether the fix they had was correct in the physics of it, either way, like their truth was, is the ball going closer to your target, and we're seeing the window we want to see in your ball flight. So I think both things can be true. Maybe he would have gotten to where he wanted faster and Ledbetter would have had more efficient information, or maybe it would have turned out differently. But I think it's leveled the playing field more.
Yeah.
There's more golfers who can get better faster, especially with what we know about distance. So it's making the depth of competition far wider versus in his era, you were kind of on your own hitting, using crappy golf clubs and ball, you weren't, things were not set up for success. So he was probably unique in the way he was able to adjust as an athlete. That's why I think like people like him have something special in them that we don't fully understand. And he was able to make those adjustments in a way that, other golfers without the information couldn't. Versus now, with the better instruction, the better technology, I think it brings more of those people into play. That's my instinct, is that the quality of information and technology has just allowed way more golfers to be at that elite level than there were back then. That's my instinct.
Understanding.
Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but
No,
that's my thought.
well, I see only one caveat to that. So I would say with the modern technology, obviously there's no reason for you not to know the answer now. If that ball goes right, you can look at it and say, well, was it path that changed? Was it face that changed? Or was it strike? There's no reason not to know. Similar for distance. Like when I was learning golf, not too long ago, like back in 2000s, it was a mystery how to hit it far. We knew that, yeah, swing speed had something to do with it, but I didn't know what my swing speed was. I didn't know what my launch angle and spin rate were. Um, I I thought my swing speed was good because it felt good.
Yeah, yeah.
I felt like, well, I'm swinging fast, am I not? Why is someone else hitting it farther than me? And I didn't know what optimal launch angles and spins were. The moment I got on TrackMan and saw, oh, wait there, I'm not low, I'm launching it too low and spinning it too high. Well, okay, well, I know how to change that, and instantly I gained distance. So the knowledge helped me a lot. I think on the flip side of that, the only caveat to, or the disadvantage I'd say to tech, wouldn't say the only, but goes into how your brain encodes movements. Now, if you're hitting balls and your first response is to look at the launch monitor numbers, your brain is encoding those movements with launch monitor numbers. And when you take those away, you are taking away a huge part of what you learn together. And I've seen this sometimes where you take away the launch monitor and they lose their ability to even self-correct, to even understand what went wrong. Whereas when you're encoding your movements with ball flight in mind, very different things. So instantly you hit the ball, you see the curve of it, and you're relating it to the field. All these things are interconnected in the
Yeah.
brain, and they're
Yep.
wired up together. And those wirings will be taken onto the golf course with you. So there's no context lost there. Whereas if you're learning with a launch monitor, you go on the course and there's no launch monitor, there is a little bit of context lost. Now, I'm not saying that's a huge thing. I'm not saying that's a call to not use launch monitors. I use them all the time in my
Well, don't
teaching,
use
in my
it.
own
Don't
game.
be excessive and use it as a crutch, I think is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
just be careful. I still, when I'm using a launch monitor, I have a screen in front of me and the ball flies off as normal. It's very, very different if I were to hit the ball into a net and not see the ball fly instantly as I would in real terms,
I
and
s-
then have to look at an iPad and say, "Oh, where did that go?" It'd be
I still
interesting to
hit
do a
a
study on it, is
I
what
don't
I
know.
would say.
I still hit a lot of golf balls at my house without my simulator or launch monitor turned on. I'll just hit balls because I just want to feel my hand in my hands how I'm hitting it. Maybe I'm a little
Without
lazy.
seeing the ball flight.
I feel like I've built that connection where I'm like, I know that was a good one or not. I mean, I will turn it on eventually, obviously, but yeah, there's a lot of balls that I hit where I'm just feeling it in my hands.
I mean,
But
strike-wise, definitely.
yeah.
Direction-wise, I can gauge it, and it
Yeah, you
depends.
could tell, like I could tell if I left the face open and you could see the initial where I'm hitting it on the impact screen.
This is actually a test I've done with people. Is I'll turn the screen off and I'll get them to hit a shot, and I'll say, "Where did you hit on the face?" So I'm testing their feel. So without looking at the launch monitors, but also where did you hit it directionally? And obviously, better players are much better at predicting where they hit it. They'll hit a shot and they're like, "Ah, that was about 10 yards left," and then we look and it was 7. But the longer you do that, the more those feels degrade.
Yeah.
So it's something I would say to be careful of if you practice, especially over winter, and you're practicing in a net
Yeah, I'm not
without
saying to do
seeing
it. I'm not saying
ball flight.
I do this maybe like 10 or 20% of the time. It's not always. But you know
Yeah.
what trained me really well for this was actually the delay in the SkyTrack. So I had that SkyTrack launch monitor for years,
Hmm.
and people hated the delay. There was like a 4, 5, 6 second delay on it. And it actually became really good for me because I could predict. I'm like, that's left, that's right. And because I kept seeing like that, it actually, I think, trained me on a subconscious level to feel like, oh yeah, that one was a little left. Like feel it in my hands first. If the club face was closed open, the impact, and then see it on the screen. And I would get very good at predicting it and feeling it. I actually think that helped me a lot, that delay.
Maybe I'll do a study on it. I'll try and design some kind of study, maybe recruit some of the sweet spot listeners if they have a launch monitor. I'm already trying to collect some data on things like vertical strike and handicap level,
Hmm.
consistencies of these things. So we'd be able to give launch monitor guidance. For
Yeah.
example, I know that to be pro level, you're going to have a path with a 0.5 degree standard deviation and a face of about a 1 degree standard deviation in block practice mode. That's typically, the elite of the elite.
Yeah. But your point makes sense is that it's kind of like AI brain rot that's starting to happen. So some people, they're starting to see, particularly like kids in high school and college who are relying on ChatGPT and other LLM models
Yeah, I've seen
to
that study.
help them think. If you rely on this technology too much to help you think, then one of the top skills as a human, which I believe are critical thinking skills, start to disappear because you're relying on someone else and you're not training your brain to go through this and figure it out and come up with ideas and problem solve. And that is in golf too. I think what you're saying makes, like, if you rely on it too much, then you're losing that intuition and that kind of art on the golf course where you don't have the launch monitor and you're forced to problem solve and deal with, all the crap that's going to happen when you play golf.
Yeah, we'll have to get Rob Gray back on because I'm sure he's had a look at all the research on feedback and
Yeah.
delays of feedback. Because I can see situations where, okay, if a feedback is immediate, then that stops you going through the process of, oh, where do I think it was?
Yeah.
For example, I know this for sure because I've done these tests and lessons. If I get a player to hit the shot and they get immediate feedback to the strike, they don't learn as quickly as if they hit the shot and then I ask them the question. I say, before you look, where do you think it was on the face?
Yeah. I'm
And that
telling you, the
will
SkyTrack
going
delay.
through that process forces them to do that, which, yeah, what you're saying with the SkyTrack delay makes sense.
That was the
Now,
biggest jump I made in ball strike, particularly with my driver, was working with that over 3, 4, 5 winters. And that delay was there. Could be something there. Maybe all the
on the
launch
other
monitor companies need to go back to a delay and not give it to us so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, on the other end of the scale, you see people all the time. They hit a bad shot, and immediately they're rolling the next ball in before they even
No, they don't even
assess
look. Yeah.
where was
Yeah.
it on the face.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
was what was the face angle? But then on the other end of the scale, you could say, well, if there's too long of a delay between feedback and the shot, you could lose out on a lot of things as well. Or if there's no feedback there, like I said, that test where it's like hit a shot, because I've done this, hit a shot, guess where it is. We used to do that with TrackMan when we first had it because we didn't have a screen. So we'd hit a shot and say, oh, I think that's like 10 yards left. And we'd look and it's like, oh, yeah, wow, I've got a pretty good feel. But the more I practiced with that, I think again, I'll have to do studies on this, but I felt like it kind of degraded my feel a little bit. Not seeing that immediate ball flight. Or maybe my feel got better, but my ability to control the face got worse. So, yeah.
How
we'll
the
do studies.
hell? I'm like going back to my notes here. I'm talking about Sir Nick Faldo, and he ended up on SkyTrack launch monitor delays.
Yeah, I went with procedural declarative knowledge, knowing something versus, yeah.
Well, in any event, to close the loop on Sir Nick, it was very cool listening to his stories. He actually told a great story about playing against like Olazabal. I mean, sorry, Sevi, another, the two great Spaniards of his era. He said it was so frustrating playing against Sevi because he would hit the ball straight. He's like, I would hit the ball down the fairway, and then this guy would disappear into the trees for 2 shots and be like, all right, I'll see you later. He'd come back, make par somehow. And he's like, every time I had to play him in a match or heads out, he's like, how do I make, I know I have to make par, and this guy's going to do something incredible. Like he said, it was so frustrating playing with this guy because Sevi was not a good driver of the golf ball. He was quite wild with his driver at times. And he said he would just like disappear and then come back and be like, oh, great. I need to, I can't make anything worse than a par here against this guy. I thought he had some funny little tidbits about, the players in his era and like kind of Ryder Cup pairings. Like he thought that, and I'm kind of a similar mind, that the captaincy is way overrated and the strategy. And he's like, I've been on some teams where he's like, oh, you two play together because you're the two tallest. And he said one captain's like, you go with the shorter guy. And then there was no pep talk. He's like, go out there. He's like, we didn't need motivation. We knew what to do. He's like, we're playing golf. He's like, we're not, it's not like a soccer match or something. He's like, you go out there and play the way you're supposed to. He's like, we didn't need motivation. You need to motivate us to play well. We knew what we were doing. So I thought that was kind of funny too.
I suppose if you have two players who dislike each other, I mean, what's the stuff happening with Bryson right now? I know.
Yeah, well, I
I've only seen
think
headlines.
Yeah, there's been some, part of it is obviously the media has their job, so they want to create controversy ahead of the event to garner attention. So I think a lot of that is saying, "Oh, Bryson is a problem for the team. He doesn't fit in." And then you hear Scheffler and the other guys being like, "Oh yeah, I love this guy. He's one of my best friends. Great teammate." So I my view, and this will come out after the Ryder Cup. I side with Sir Nick. I think it is totally overblown, the team, all that stuff. I think it's a short-term exhibition amongst the best players in the world, and they all know what to do. They all know how to play, and they don't need special instructions on what to do. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's my instinct. And like, yeah, Europe seems to have like better team camaraderie from the outside. Is that why they win more? I don't know, but I don't think
As
golf,
you
I just
say,
don't think golf is a team sport. It is an individual sport, and you don't have to interact with another. Like, you're not running a play with your teammate. You're not passing the baton. You're hitting the ball exactly the same as you would. And maybe some players' perception of that is why that screws them up, because it feels like a team event, but it makes them like anchor themselves to another player when they would never do that. So I love the Ryder Cup. Don't get me wrong. I love watching the drama, but I think a lot of the posturing and stuff is overrated.
wonder if any of the beef is actually faked. Because I know they do it in like UFC fights, I hear, where
Yeah, yeah.
they just build it up so then they have little fights in the weighing and things like that.
I think there's legitimate dislike amongst. I've heard stories. I won't divulge, but I think there's some of the stuff is real.
I'm just visualizing Rory and Bryson sitting down for a beer, going, "You know what? We should start some internet beef to spice
Yeah, I
things
don't.
up a little bit to get a bit more
I
viewers and
don't.
ratings."
I don't think those two are buddies. I'll say that. I don't think they're close friends. I don't think they're very different people and operate
Interesting.
differently. Yeah, I think that's what makes the event interesting, is because there is bad blood, and sometimes, last time when I was in Europe, there were some almost fights afterwards. The caddies are getting involved, and there's always some type of controversy. And I'm going to predict that the Long Island fans do something to heighten the controversy. I just found out that I'm going this weekend and potentially on Friday. So I'm going to witness this firsthand. And obviously, when you listen to this, you'll know what happened. But I'm a little worried about what the Long Island fans are going to do to
I
the
hope it's
Europeans.
respectful.
It's not going to be respectful.
No.
That's my
Okay.
prediction. It will not be
Oh,
respectful.
well. That's what
Because
golf is turned into.
there's going to be a lot of home field advantage. The crowd is going to take that seriously. So I predict there's going to be some. My prediction is that things get out of hand on one day. The European
Shouting in
side,
backswings.
yeah, I hope not. My hope is it doesn't get out of hand, but I think it's going to. That's my prediction, and I think there's going to be a controversy around it. But I hope it's clean golf, and I hope USA wins. Sir Nick was adamant that Europe was going to win, but
I just
we'll
hope
see
it's
what
a good
happens.
game. I
Yeah, I'm
don't
excited.
really have much. I'm not. I mean, I think there's a little bit in me that says, "Okay, come on, Europe, win," but I'm not. I'm not like live or die. Europe. I just want to see good entertainment. That's all. Good golf, respectful golf.
Yeah, I want to see a good match, good matches. I very badly want to see America win. I think losing two in a row, and I want to see a close one, because the last few haven't been close. Like, the home team seems to keep dominating. So I love, if all things align, the crowd doesn't go crazy. It's a close match. It comes down to singles on Sunday, and USA wins, and we don't lose two in a row. That's my hope, but I don't think it's going to work out exactly like that. What else do we have? We rambled a bit there. Do we have another topic we want to hit before we close up shop today?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about. So I released the advanced striking module. I was going to call it the advanced arc depth module, but it ended up being more than that in the strike plan. So I went through some really complex geometry and things that I figured out, and talking about consistency, because obviously everybody wants to be a striking consistency strike. Sorry. Second coffee of the day. I need 3. Everybody wants to be a consistent striker of the golf ball. That is something that I'd say accounts for 90% of the game, really, if not more. And so the things that I look at in terms of consistency, there are ways of creating wider margins for error. So this is like driving down a street and having a wider street, a wider gap between barriers. And the way that you would do that, dynamic loft is a huge one. So the less dynamic loft you have, it increases your ability to strike higher on the face without fatting it. For example,
It'd be less shaft lean and less angle of attack difference.
more forward
More?
shaft lean
More forward.
helps.
Yeah.
And a steeper attack angle as well helps. But this forward shaft lean is probably the bigger thing here. Allows you to hit higher on the face before it becomes a fat shot. For example, if you've got imagine someone who's scooping it, right? They're on their back foot scooping it, a beginner. They got 5 degrees negative shaft lean at impact. Club shaft is leaning backwards and a 0 attack angle. And on the other end, you've got Jon Rahm. He's hitting a low flighted 7-iron, and he's got 20 degrees of forward shaft lean and a 9-degree attack angle. Now, if you took both of those players and dropped their arc depth in so they hit the 4th groove, the person who's leaning back, the amateur, is going to start hitting fat shots, whereas Jon Rahm is still going to be ball, then turf. If you drop another groove into the 5th groove, that amateur is going to start to lose significant distance. It's going to start to interact with the turf maybe an inch and a half behind the ball, whereas Jon Rahm is still hitting ball and turf. When you get to the 6th groove, the amateur has now laid the sod over it. Jon Rahm is hitting ball and turf together. It's a slight pro flyer. He might get a little touch more inconsistency with distance, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, but it's still going to land on the green, still going to be a good shot, whereas the amateurs laid the sod over it. So you can hit higher on the face with a more Jon Rahm technique than you can with an amateur technique. And that's obviously on a sliding scale. The disadvantages of being a Jon Rahm are Koepka is the one that I've seen the TrackMan data for. Do you know how high Brooks Koepka launches his 7-iron?
I'm going to say 16 degrees.
It's like 11 degrees.
11?
Yeah,
but he's probably got an incredible amount of spin on it because of his speed.
The TrackMan number I saw was the dynamic loft was about 16, and he's hitting about 9 degrees down. Now, this could have just been a flighted club. I don't know, maybe he's trying to punch it, something like that. But they launch it pretty low, and like I said, the advantage of that much dynamic or that much shaft lean, the strike you can get away with more, but the disadvantage, you're going to flight it lower. So for the average person with not a lot of swing speed, they probably wouldn't be able to manage 11-degree launch angle because it's just not going to get up in the air. Probably peak height would be like 12 yards or something like that. Maybe 30, 36 feet, something like that. So, you're trying to balance these things really. Generally, I'd say, if you've got lots of green to work with, go with a lower flighted shot. It's going to tend to improve strike quality and hit the higher shots only when necessary. And if you've got a good lie, you've got more maneuverability there. Doing some research.
Yeah, I'm looking at Mackenzie had sent me a TrackMan report. I mean, this was probably a year or two ago, and I'm just pulling up.
Average pro launch is 16 degrees with a 7.
Yeah, but this must be a 9-iron because I'm seeing a lot of shots at like 160 yards for him.
All right.
Yeah, like spin rate in the 8,000s, attack angle, -6, -7, -8, dynamic loft in the 26 to 25 range. But that's a 9-iron, not a 7-iron, obviously.
Yeah, well, we can look at the average TrackMan numbers for sure, and that gives a good idea. But anyway, from all the research I did with the geometry models I have, it turns out they're about 4 to 6 down with attack angle, and about 15 degrees of forward shaft lean produces very, very good margins for error either side. So you can shift the low point around, you can shift the arc depth up and down a reasonable amount both sides. And that's what the pros have settled on. So it's kind of that evolution and the self-organizing towards optimal. The pros already do that. And then when you look at the ladies tour, they tend to be a touch shallower and a touch more dynamic loft. And that's because they tend to have less speed on average. And so they're balancing that optimal strike part with the optimal trajectory part. So
and some golf
sliding scales.
and I know I have some close friends who like have the scoop move and they've tried forever to get that shaft lean. It's just really hard for
Yeah,
them to like not do it. Like I'm like preset the club like 40 degrees forward, like exaggerate the hell of the opposite. And yeah, you look at it impact and the hands are still scooping. Sometimes it's a really hard move for people to get around.
well, one of the best things that we've talked about this is the Harvey Pennick idea of he told that person,
Yeah,
"Oh,
go
I'm
under the
hitting it
branch.
poorly," and he
Yeah,
said, "Oh,
yeah.
go under the branch, under that tree there, just hit balls for a while." And obviously, the more you try and scoop it and add loft, you're going to be hitting that tree. Whereas if you're trying to flight it under that tree, you're probably going to get more forward shaft lean, self-organized towards those things. Not everybody does, but that's
And
a
for
good.
me, it's the opposite now. Like for me to add loft, like for me to try and hit a 4-iron high and
Yeah.
try and like do the opposite where I'm like releasing early, like that's very hard for me to do because I'm become such a crazy shaft leaner at this point. So yeah, when you get stuck in your little worlds, but as you said, like it's better to be on that end of the spectrum because as you said, it makes sense why you have more margin for error on a number of things.
Well, the good news is with a 4-iron, you already have preset less loft. So you don't
Yeah.
need as much forward shaft lean with a
Yeah.
4-iron. So that's
But
why pros
it's just
tend to
not
move
going
the ball
high.
position a little forwards
Yeah.
and tend to not have as much of that later release. So yeah, these things are club relative, but yeah, you don't need as much forward shaft lean with a 4-iron because the club already has less loft on it. So yeah, that's one way of improving consistency is widening your margin for error. Reducing dynamic loft is huge for that one. The other thing that I see a lot is try to live in the middle of those margins. So say, for example, your acceptable shots. And in my recent research, I found that you could actually hit on the second groove. It does depend on how forgiving your club is, but you could hit on the second groove. And yes, you lose distance, but if you're playing a good strategy, it's still going to land on the green. I was losing about 15 yards or so. So, if I'm playing 7 yards past the pin,
Yeah,
if
you
I
get away with it.
flush
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
if I flush it, it's okay. I've got a 21-foot putt. And if I hit the second groove, I'm 8 yards short. I've got 24-foot putt. So these aren't bad things. Living between groove 2 and 5, 2 and 6, if you have, the John Rahm margins for errors. And so living in the middle of that, so that kind of about the fourth groove, and just making sure that your average is there. So that's what I do a lot. I look at what a player's doing with dynamic loft and attack angle. Then we work out, okay, these are your margins. And for some people, they need to be close to the third groove. Some people, they need to be close to the fourth groove. And we just try and average that out. What you don't want is to have small margins. So the average golfer I see has small margins for error. So, leaning the shaft back, shallow attack angle. And then their patterns are very balanced, maybe towards the higher end of the scale. So the average strike is on the fifth groove. Now, if that's the case, you're going to have a lot of chunk shots. You would be someone who would be more living on the bottom end. So you just
Yeah,
have
I
to,
don't. I very rarely am striking it too high on the face. Well,
yeah,
this all gets back to like vertical strike as a great proxy for various things in your golf swing. Kind of, what we were talking about, arc depth, and so it's a really good thing to focus on. Is kind
yeah.
of what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other part of consistency. So we got wider margins, a wider road. We're living in the middle of that road as well. So you're driving down the middle of the street, not close to the edge. It's pointless having a wide road if you drive close to the barrier, but also have the ability to adjust when necessary. So that's the skill work that I talk about. So if I hit a little low on the face, or if I notice that pattern is emerging, I have the awareness of that and I have the ability to adjust it as well. It could be a simple cue, just as, okay, it's a little low on the face. I'm going to try and dig in a little bit more for the next one. Oh, these are high on the face. I'm going to try and pick it for the next few. So having the ability to adjust is a big thing for consistency as well. That's, the analogy for that is driving your car and just having the ability to move it around. And then the last thing for consistency is having a smaller standard deviation. Being able to not have the groove move around too much once you're in the middle. So an ideal scenario would be John Rahm technique. He's living on the fourth groove on average. If it starts to go off, he can adjust it back and it doesn't go off anyway. This is kind of like the Tesla self-driving part, where if it starts to go outside the lane, it auto corrects. And so, to get smaller standard deviations, that's the hardest one, and to get genuinely more consistent movements. But practice more, hit more balls, obviously, do it over a longer time. Where I think people sabotage themselves with this is maybe too much internal thinking. I've seen that makes a lot of factors more inconsistent. So if I ask a player to just focus on the depth that they're digging, they tend to be able to hit consistently on a similar groove. Whereas if I ask them to think about body height, for example, or whether their arms are straightening or flexing, that's more of an internal focus. And then their strike starts to get a little bit more erratic with those internal focuses. And when you think of what most people think, right, they're all thinking internal focuses. So a lot of people are sabotaging themselves there. The other thing, I've noticed in my own game, because I haven't directly changed my swing a lot in the last 10 years, I've become more consistent with striking. So if you're always bouncing around looking for a new swing, then good luck getting consistent arc depth. So that's not to say never chase a new swing. Sometimes it can be good to go from that leaning shaft back to leaning forwards like Jon Rahm. And that would open up bigger margins for error. But if once you get like Jon Rahm, if you decide, I want to be more like Brooks Koepka now, I want to be more like Justin Thomas now, if you're bouncing around all the time looking for a swing secret and staying internal constantly, that can create inconsistency. So, yeah, create a bigger road, drive in the middle of the road, learn to adjust if it's going off, and get some self-driving in there as well. That's the analogy version of consistent strikes.
Pay for the Tesla auto drive.
Yeah.
I actually tried that recently. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I've seen the, hands off the wheel, and if it starts to go off, it wasn't a Tesla, but yeah, it was pretty scary.
Oh, I let it drive me around. I was in Philadelphia. It was my friend's car. I took my hands off the wheel. It drove me around the entire city. It was unbelievable.
Okay. We have those Waymo.
Waymos, yeah.
Zoo somethings.
Yeah, well,
there's another one in.
Yeah, I think they're using LiDAR, whereas Tesla uses cameras, or vice versa. Maybe I screwed that up. It's different technology, and they're obviously like fighting for the autonomous taxi world now. But yeah, I've done the full self-driving a few times now. It's crazy. It's very good. It actually doesn't bother me. I do it we have a Volvo SUV, and I do it on the highways. It will steer for you and keep you in the lane and adjust your speed, and I just let it go. It's pretty good. Need more of that in the golf game is what you're saying. All right, enough tangents for this episode. Shall we wrap it up there?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, so arc depth, Sir Nick, and creating a wider road with a little more shaft lean. All right. That's it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making it this far, as always. If you did make it, this other podcast I listened to, they call it The Deep End. I listened to this show, Colin and Samir. I'm trying to learn more about YouTube. And they always say, if you make it to the deep end, thank you. So I think if you made it to the deep end of our episode, we thank you as well. So see you next time with a new one. Check out Adam's stuff, adamyounggolf.com, Strike Plan, all your stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Check out my YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time with a new episode.